But that's super superficial, right? That's very superficial as a comparison, because what is not mentioned there is that using managed services introduces a whole lot of complexity.
Hi, welcome everyone. Today we're talking to Johannes Haux. He's a co-founder of a company called Sysmagine. So, hi Johannes, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing fine. Thanks, Natalie. What about you?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you very much. So, could you please tell maybe a couple of words about your company, Sysmagine? What are you doing?
Yeah, we at Sysmagine, we're developing a code review tool called Mergeboard. And with Mergeboard, we help teams of developers do faster code reviews without compromising on review quality with some intelligent change visualization.
Cool, well, thank you. Topic for today that have been chosen is cloud vendor lock-in. Should you go for AWS while building your tool? So if you had to convince me in one sentence about why to avoid vendor lock-in, what would it be?
All right, so in one sentence, I'd probably go for avoid vendor lock-in to keep your freedom to switch to any provider you like to the cost benefit that suits you best, to the cost benefit ratio that suits you best at any time.
Cool. What are the practices to avoid vendor lock-in?
Well, to answer that question, I think we have to take a step back first.
Sure.
Think about why is vendor lock-in so common, right? And what we see is that companies like AWS, Google Cloud Services, they pitch you this idea of having the tech at your fingertips to build this scalable app, just like that, and you can honestly get started super quickly with those tools. Mm-hmm. The thing is, if you do that, if you build an app solely based on those cloud services, you're building something very complex with a lot of black boxes, and it's super optimized for being scalable usually. But there's this beautiful quote from Sir Tony Hoare that says, "Premature optimization is the root of all evil." And I think this is something we really need to take into account here, right? You usually, when starting out building something, you usually don't know what your bottlenecks are. Mm-hmm. So you really need to think about this question first. Do we need something complex and scalable when we start building something or when we start building our service, for example? And if the answer to that question is no, I'd say the best practice to avoid vendor lock-in is just to go with open source alternatives. There are GitHub repos full of alternatives listed to AWS services, Google Cloud Services, etc., where you can just get started with that, and you can run those on any provider in the end, so you're not locked in. Mm-hmm. If the answer would be yes, we need something scalable right now, one way to avoid lock-in would be to go for services that use an API that is shared between different providers. For example, Amazon's S3 object storage shares an API with other providers. So if you want to switch the provider, you can do that very easily without having to rewrite all your code. So you're not very locked into that part. So I think those are some practices that can help you not getting locked in so easily.
Cool. Thank you. Is it cost effective to avoid vendor lock-in? How would you compare those costs of developing system using managed AWS services versus unmanaged alternatives?
Yeah, I mean that's the core question, right? should I build it myself or should I buy it? And I think one interesting aspect is that this question implies a way we compare those two things, right? On the one hand, we have managed services. They give me a low barrier of entry. Mm-hmm. There's a whole bunch of functionality I can use right away, and in the beginning, at least, they are super cheap to get started with, right? I mean, even if you're a student or a startup, you get those credits, you can just, start building stuff for free. If I compare that with, I have to write my own software, I have to maintain my servers, I have to, maintain my Docker containers, run updates, all this stuff. If I compare those two, of course, I'd say, hey, let's go the AWS way. But that's super superficial, right? That's very superficial as a comparison. Because what is not mentioned there is that using managed services introduces a whole lot of complexity, right? So first of all, you cannot run it on your local machine. I think that's something that gets lost very, very quickly when thinking about this. And what does that imply? If I run tests, right? If I have them in my CI pipeline, I always have to connect to the cloud service and run all the logic there. And that's not only some kind of hassle to set up, it's also expensive because, of course, the service providers will charge you for that. The other thing is, I mentioned it before, you're introducing a whole lot of black boxes into your software stack. And that can become a problem because, I mean, of course, you can probably read the API documentation, that kind of stuff, but having built something on your own, having cracked open that box, so to say, lets you work with that code far differently than if you just book the service and be done with it. So having questions, how do these functions work, those services, those cannot be answered if you use a service like that. And something that you always will have to do is, even if you have a managed service, you still will have to configure that service, you still have to maintain that service. So it might get easier, or it might be easier to start out, but it's still work you need to put in there. So if you then say, hey, maybe I use cloud service and Docker containers, that might actually be more cost effective. It might cost me more in the beginning to set everything up, but on the long run, I might save costs. And another thing that we from our own experience can say is, when we set out to build our tool, we said, hey, we want to make a cloud service, right? It's a software as a service product. We have a web interface. We want people to log in to our server. Then our first B2B customers came and said, we want the on-premise solution. And if we had built everything with Amazon cloud services, that would have been super expensive to then extract this functionality back into our own servers, package it up into an on-prem version, and then ship that to the customer, right? So if this is something that might be on the roadmap somewhere, having an on-premise version of your service, then I would be very careful with going for some AWS or any cloud service provider service solution.
I see.
Yeah, right. So, and again, when using cloud services, you usually pay for this scaling thing, right? It's usually somewhere in the price that if things scale up, that's what you pay for. And many apps don't need that, at least not in the beginning, right? One very good example is Stack Overflow, right? This webpage, everybody knows that, at least all the developers, it's like this huge thing, and they don't have a lot of fluctuation in their user numbers. So they can work with that, and that's why they have they have a bunch of their own dedicated servers, right? So if you don't anticipate this rapid fluctuation of users, then it's usually a good idea to stick to a very solid custom-made solution.
I see. So you already started, you covered already partially my next question. So if we're going point by point, could you please define the pros and cons of avoiding vendor lock?
Okay, you're right. We covered some ground there.
Yeah.
Well, one of the pros I think is that you can, so if you avoid vendor lock-in, you can always choose the best provider, best on features and price down the road. And also to keep in mind here, you don't have to build your whole app with Amazon services, right? You can also just use one small part that needs to scale. And once you figured that out, once you know your bottleneck, you can really choose and go for the right service there. Right. Another pro would probably be that you really have control over the complete infrastructure if you avoid this kind of vendor lock-in. Development, I'd say, gets easier without black box components. You can, documentation is all good, but if you can take a look at the code, you have the final answer there. I mean, you have to read it, but you can see what's happening. And one point where sometimes funny stories come from is that you avoid costly mistakes, right? Something that happens from time to time is that, I think there was this one story where a small startup went on television. They said, hey, we have this app, and then a whole bunch of people went to their website. The Amazon Cloud bill went to $10,000 per month. They didn't convert anybody, right? They didn't gain any customers. So this is something. Well, I mean, it's nice that the website worked smoothly, or the app went smoothly, but it cost them a whole bunch of money, and nothing really was gained. So you don't always need this kind of scalability, and sometimes it's okay if the site just runs a bit slower. And if you then find out, hey, we need performance here, you can still upgrade later on. Especially if you're a startup, nobody will say that's bad handling. Right. So I think those are a few pros. Right. Cons or reasons why you might want to log into a vendor. I'd say, for example, if you use a bunch of services from one vendor, you usually have a nice dashboard or a tool to manage those services. That is something I think is really handy. It's super easy to get started. I think that's really a good reason to use those tools, especially if you want to do rapid prototyping and test with real users out there. I think that it just makes sense even if you're a small team to try that. And if you know that there's going to be high fluctuation in demand, you still have to make the business decision, but it still might be a very good choice to say, hey, we need this support by this cloud provider to be ready for any demand, and then we're ready to pay for that.
Cool. Great, thank you. Are infrastructure as code tools like Terraform able to give you a true non-vendor locked experience? Is it possible?
To be honest, I've not used Terraform myself, but I actually checked out the product, and it looks really great to me, right? So what Terraform offers you is to spin up cloud servers and, for example, Docker containers on those servers using a simple config file. And then you can specify which provider you want those servers from and on which servers you want to run your Docker images. And that's really cool, right? This helps you not get locked into any one of those providers. Now, the moment you start using services by those providers in your Docker images, that's a whole nother story. So you have to be careful there, right? You have to differentiate. But if you're only using this spinning up servers easily feature, that's really cool. That's where Terraform, I think, can really, really help you. Help you not get locked in. Again, like tools like Terraform and Kubernetes, they really help you build scalable apps, right? Kubernetes has this automation. If you know your load is increasing, it spins up your Docker images. Terraform lets you do this by hand, basically. Again, I think what you have to ask yourself is, do I need to be scalable right now? Because resources on demand in the end are always expensive. And if you can use a bunch of dedicated service like Stack Overflow does, I think that would be the better solution. But if you know what your demand is, and if you know your demand is going to increase steadily, and you want to spin up service easily, on and on, Terraform, I think, looks like a really, really good solution.
So my last question of this main part would be, if you met 10 years old Johannes, what would you tell him? That's not really topic related, but I'm just interested. Yeah, I'm just interested.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I would probably not talk to Johannes about dedicated servers and cloud service providers.
Not yet.
Not yet. Not now that 10 years old. No. I mean, maybe I'd tell him to invest in Bitcoin once it's out there. But no, probably I would tell him to enjoy life as it is. Go play with his friends. Do his homework. Homework is important. I'd probably also tell him, but not as important as friendship. So rather go play with your friends. It's okay to skip from time to time. Probably in that.
So value of friendship.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so on that note, let's move to our rapid fire round. Who is your business hero?
Okay, good question. I think, I must say, it's not really business hero, but I'd say success hero.
Yeah.
And that's my wife, to be honest. My wife is,
tell us more
go check her out on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
my wife is super successful in school, while studying, and now in her various jobs she's done. So that's super impressive to me. And she is incidentally also the one that allowed me to be able to run a startup, because I mean, in the beginning we're still bootstrapping. I didn't have that kind of income. So without my wife, I wouldn't be here. So yeah, she's my success
she's
hero.
Let's say your investor at some point.
Yeah.
Beautiful, that's so sweet. Your great achievement that is not on your CV. It can be really not business related.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be business related. Well, the first thing that, I have one business one, and maybe I think of a non-business one later on. So when I was still going to school, I was really into filming and doing movies, and of course, at some point, somebody comes to you and asks, "Hey, can you film our theater thing?" and so on. And I really did one project early on where I filmed some theater play from a church, and the DVD of that sold really, really well. And this really got me into this mindset: hey, if I do something people want, I can charge them money for it. And this is how I financed my first real camera. so that was a really good experience.
Great.
Business-wise. Yeah.
Counts. Your biggest regret?
My biggest regret? Okay, that's hard.
You can take some time, just to...
I think one thing I realized quite late is that I have led a very, very privileged life, or I'm leading a very privileged life. And that allowed me to, be very slack during my studies. So during my bachelor's, I studied physics. I was really more into partying than studying, and that really was a bad thing. And then during my master's, I realized, wait, if I do my homework, this really is fun, and I can learn a whole bunch of stuff. and this really helps me everywhere in life. So this realization that sitting yourself down and doing your homework and working through things really helps you. Think that I got this realization so late, that's a big regret. I don't know how to counter that, but I would have liked to know that earlier.
Wow, that's a message. That's quite a message. Which profession would you choose if you weren't a COO of Sysmagine? You already mentioned your filming career, let's say.
Yeah, I stopped that after seeing the hours versus pay ratio there in that kind of business. It's a really hard question. I studied physics. I then did computer vision. So by education, I'm a computer vision engineer, and I know my deep learning. So
you can mention 2 or 3 professions.
Yeah, I probably would. No, it's really a hard question. The thing is, when I started doing a PhD, and then I quit that and started looking for jobs, and I did this when the COVID pandemic started and the first lockdown was active, and so nobody was hiring, and I had to write a bunch of applications, and I really noticed that I'm not sure really what I want. And then having this experience of working on a problem you define yourself and having to find like the whole solution, not just a part, that's really cool. So independent of the actual field I want to work in later on, I really like this project management aspect of things while being very technical about the problem you want to solve. My time as part of Sysmagine is I learned a lot. I got to know a lot of people, and working with people is something I really enjoy. So I think this aspect I would really focus on in the future.
Beautiful. Well, Johannes, I have no more question for you. Thank you very much for your answers, and we'll really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia, for having me. It was really great fun, and yeah,